Hi, welcome to Sylvie's technique vlog. In this vlog, I'm talking about using super high repetition as your training for a technique. So if you have any technique that's giving you trouble, train that one at super high repetition numbers. So for me, I was in fights and I was thinking to myself, elbow, 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 but I just couldn't access it under the pressure. So I've started doing 1,000 elbows a day, which sounds crazy, but it's totally doable. And I've been doing it for about 4 months, and I do find that in fights, I'm now more able to access them. And it's partly because when you do super high numbers like that, you build the fatigue and boredom into the technique, so that when you're finding yourself in these positions, you can start to throw them. And you can do it with any technique. You can do it with blocks, teeps, just your right hand, step backs. The point is to do super high numbers. So the thing about using super high repetition is that this is not a new idea or even my idea. This is very tied to use like super high repetition to teach things. I kind of got the idea twofold. One is that I keep hearing from these fighters how when they first started Muay Thai, all they did was super high repetition of things that they were bored out of their minds doing. So these fighters, including my trainer, they just, when they first started, all they did for like 2 months, 3 months was just marching back and forth with their blocks, right? This is super boring, super fatiguing, and your mind starts to go different places. But what's incredible about it is that through that super high repetition, they cannot do that wrong. Like, you ask them to do it wrong, even when they make fun of me, it's still kind of right. Like, it's incredible. And then the second part of it was Pidang up in Chiang Mai. I was having trouble blocking in fights. So he basically was like, just stand in front of the mirror and do these hit drills of just blocking all the time. So basically I would just stand in front of the mirror and all I had to do was block fast. What was interesting about that is when I first started, I had all of this tension in my hips that made it really hard for me to like keep doing the blocks, and I'd get really tired kind of straight away. That illustrated to me why I'm not blocking in fights, is because I'm tired, I'm not on my toes, like I'm kind of slow doing it. But by doing the super fast, super high repetition, because you have to keep going under boredom and under fatigue, it carves out the difficulties of the technique in a way that you can't mentally do. Like just physically doing it over and over again carves away the excess, and so the tension in my hips had to go because I was tired. So it just kind of melted itself away, like it solved itself. It's like how if you want to be able to have high mileage, you just have to run a lot, like just keep running. So my difficulty lately has been that I really wanted to elbow in fights, and I would think in the fight, elbow, 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 but then I just wouldn't throw it. So my mind was in high repetition wanting to do it, but my body hadn't actually done the work. So now I'm doing 1,000 elbows every day, which sounds insane. It's not. It is a very high number, but I kind of stretch it out and space it out throughout the day. I do like sets of 100 and things like this. The reason this is interesting to me is because when you do super high repetition, you force your body to understand the technique in a way that you can't mentally figure out yourself. So if you look at like normal shadow boxing, you kind of throw things in isolation with other things, and that's nice. You want to see how everything fits together kind of thing. But when you throw something in isolation, like only one thing over and over again, just like in high repetition, the elements of those elbows that got worked on would never be worked on in low repetition. They only get worked on in high repetition because of that fatigue and because of having to do it over and over again. It just kind of like finds its way. And I didn't have to actually focus on it mentally as much because of the physical repetition. So now when I'm in the ring, instead of mentally thinking elbow, elbow, elbow and not accessing it, my body's been there before. Like my body has thrown so many elbows that when I'm like, I've been here, I can throw it in a way that I couldn't do before. So the thing about repetition is that the things that you think you can figure out through like, I'm really gonna think about the technique on this, you can't fully figure out. You need to kind of get out of your head a little bit like those Thai kids just marching for months, bored out of their minds, getting that repetition done. So a thing to look out for when you're doing super high repetition is not to overthink the technique. If you overthink 1,000 elbows a day, you will hate elbows more than anything you've ever done in your life. Don't overthink it. Let it be wrong. When I first started, I worked on just getting the technique right because I didn't want to be dropping my hands and, all over. I'm not doing all different elbows. I'm only doing fan sok. I'm only doing elbows this way, 1,000. So I have to figure out the movement of my feet, of my legs, of my hips, of my guard. All of these things get worked out through the high repetition. Whereas if I was trying to think of every single element, I'd get lost and I would forget parts of it. But it basically like water over a rock smooths itself out. So look out for overthinking your technique. Let it be wrong and it will figure itself out through the repetition. The thing that I really like about the super high repetition is I hate doing things kind of like, if you were like, Sylvie, do 100 kicks on the bag, I'm not a fan of that. I'm not a let's count this out, I love numbers kind of person. But what I've found that I really like about it in the 4 months that I've been doing this is that because you become so familiar with doing it, because you're doing it all the time, you start to feel these really minute differences that you wouldn't have been aware of at lower numbers. Somewhat similar to fighting 200 fights, you find these very small details that just get washed over when it's lower numbers. You just can't see them because you're not as familiar with the contact of it. So for me, it's elbows. For you, it could be blocks, it could be teeps, it could be just your right hand, it could be step back. But basically, you want to choose something that you're not comfortable with, like a weakness in your technique, and turn that into the thing that you're gonna do so many of. If you love your left hook, great, do a lot of them. Don't make that your 1,000 left hooks a day. If you're having a hard time with your uppercut or your block just isn't coming up the way you want it to, that's the one you do 100, 500, 1,000 of, and you will just put it into your body like you couldn't even imagine. And don't fret about the fact that you're gonna hate it on some days. It will come back around, and then when you feel it and the accessibility you have under stress because you've done it so many times, that feeling of success totally stronger than any feeling of, my God, I hate this for 5 days or something.